What's up, everybody? This is episode number 37 of Rolling with Reason. I honestly cannot even fathom that that number has gotten to 37. I think that is actually insane to think about. But I think it's so cool. I think it's cool that we made it this far. I think it's so cool just what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Um, if you guys have never been to this podcast or listened to this podcast, I am sorry in advance. All right. This podcast is just a compilation, I guess, of my merged together thoughts and processes from the week in a random sporadic order that is inconsistent with the coherent consistency of society in today's manners. What does that mean? You got me because I'm not really sure. I mean, I kind of have a general idea of what I was going for there, but I think the coherent um, description and details between those words maybe aren't as thoughtful as they should be. But that's exactly what this podcast is. It's kind of an unthoughtful, uncurated, just off of the top of my head. How are things going, and what do I think about the week that just took place? Let's talk about work, because we all love work, right? So I changed locations again for work, and that kind of thing it can take a toll on you, to say the least, and that's kind of how I feel about that. I feel like managing and working with that whole work atmosphere thing has got me thinking and acting in ways that I'm not sure how to interpret, I guess. Consistency, I feel like, is a big factor, and I've been kind of falling off that wagon. Just I feel like in some maybe particular ways as far as dieting and stuff is concerned, and I mean, especially when By the way, happy late Easter on Easter. That's when this gets recorded. So if you're into that sort of thing, happy Easter. Hey, happy holiday. I hope you got like a extra day off work. That's cool, but back to what I was saying. That was the squirrel thing for any of you newcomers. Yeah, I work, man. Work is a crazy thing, especially when you move around a lot. I guess like I do, it's hard to navigate that thing, and it's hard to understand it. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's part of the human experience, like working to thrive and survive, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's it, right? That's a big part of what is being on this planet. Um, but I think you can still find mental consistency in those moments, and that's exactly what I've been trying to do, and I think that's extremely helpful for my mental well-being. I'm just trying to find the, half glass full type of thing, not the half, glass empty sort of guy. And so that's how I've approached this weekend. I definitely had some high stress moments, to say the least, but it'll all work out and everything usually pans out in that way. So can't worry about it too much. As long as I'm a firm believer, you keep working hard, you keep doing the stuff that you're doing, everything's gonna pan out. And so that's really cool. And I think that's a good mindset for me, just as I navigate all this stuff. I didn't make it to jujitsu this week, so that really sucks. We had the seminar the previous weekend, and I was excited to, use some of the stuff I learned. And I guess it just kind of comes back to, what is a schedule? What is life? What is moving forward, I guess, in conjunction with your goals. And after I did that seminar, I think it was like a day or two after, my back, and maybe it's because I went to the new site, maybe I was performing some more physical activity. It didn't feel quite right, and I didn't want to go back in just quite yet. And so we're gonna see how that plays out. But also, this new site doesn't allow for me to train early in the mornings, and which is like a big thing that I really want. It would be extremely beneficial, and I'm trying to find that within work. And if I can't find that, I think just prioritizing my objectives to get to that point, is going to be that's got to be the bigger priority, right? If the priority is to secure that occupation that we actually enjoy doing anyways in the first place, to be able to adequately adjust for the schedule that we want to live, that's going to be the goal. That's going to be the thing. So I guess in some ways, if that means missing the thing that you love to be able to obtain it, um, maybe there's like a time frame or a parameter there to kind of gauge that and kind of understand what it is that that time frame is, and that's different for everybody for sure. But you know, maybe that's kind of one of the avenues I have to pursue, let alone the back, right? So we had the back thing, and I thought, it wouldn't be a good idea to kind of push this into a re-injury, right? Because as you guys know, for anybody that's been listening or watching, whether it be on YouTube or whether it be on Spotify, yeah, we tweaked our back right before one of the biggest Ohio competitions, and it's unfortunate. And so we have a video we're putting together for that. I feel like I keep talking about this every week, but you guys know, I'm just a busy guy, and so and I really take my time with the jujitsu videos, just because I want something cool and unique, and so we'll touch on that in a minute, but yeah, just kind of focusing and honing in on like what is that process and what's that look like. I don't think we're supposed to exactly know what that is, but I think, just working towards it and having that in our mind, both consciously and subconsciously, we'll kind of orient ourselves in that direction. So I think that's great. Um, but there's factors there and there's discipline there that needs to be accounted for. And I think it's really easy in today's consumer environments to neglect finances. I think it's promoted that way. And I think that's a pitfall that we all need to be mindful of in every kind of scenario, especially in today's society with kind of the unsettling, what feels like bubbling of the economy in association with AI. But that's its own thing in of itself. And I'm not somebody who does economics thoroughly, but that's an interesting, troublesome thought. Kind of one company is supporting every tech company to try and build what is the AI future. It's a crazy thing. Understanding or trying to understand how that's going to play out and how you um, use your eggs is a hard thing to sort out and understand. But nonetheless, uh, we need to have our priorities set right in terms of finances and stuff, and be mindful of the things that we're doing to set us up for the future. If you do that correctly, if you take the time to be disciplined now, I think you'll have more free time in the future. And what free time is to everybody is, a little different for um, everybody. And for me, I think that's just training more. I think it's getting to compete more. That's what my free time is realistically. And so I'm doing this stuff to try and free up that free time. But I also just love, jujitsu in conjunction with jujitsu programming as well. And so we were working on that a lot today. And I think we talked about it in a couple episodes ago, but we were using this tool called SSH. This is going to be one of those moments when I go into a high detailed, tech oriented explanation of what that is, because it helps me. And I hope you guys like listening to it. I hope it maybe helps you pass your time. But SSH is kind of just another acronym. It's one of those file types or files, actually, it's a directory, which is a folder that exists on your system, usually by default, in association with users. So check this out. When you create like a profile on your MacBook or even your Windows computer, you fall under what's called a user. And so that user is the one that you log into, right? Let's say you have multiple people sharing that system. You'll have multiple users, right? And so let's say little Jimmy wants to hop on the computer and he wants to um, navigate to his games, or he wants stuff to always look the same for him, and you don't want him to mess with your work stuff. What do? Well, you create Jimmy a little account, and you give little Jimmy an account, and so now he's a separate user. Both of those users, by default, usually have that directory I was talking about, that folder. That's called an SSH folder. That SSH folder actually stands for something. SSH is an acronym. It stands for Secure Shell. And so that's a tooling that lets you use um, what we call, I suppose, remote access. And so if I want to access, let's say, a server, or even just a computer in general from a specific location, the way that I do that is called SSHing in. And so there's some stuff that you have to set up in order for this to work adequately, but it's relatively simple. And so you validate that the file exists in the first place. There's a couple computer commands for that, and we can go into detail, but I think the big thing here, just to note, is that there should be specific permissions labeled on that file. And so you check that, and if it's not labeled correctly, you need to change the mode so that the permissions are excuse me, displayed and set correctly. Once that's done, that means that you essentially have set it up so that now only the person that owns that folder can read, write, or perform executables with it. And then there's also another file that we place inside of it, but it's kind of specific to the process of which is maybe using SSH keys, which fundamentally or logically, I suppose, not fundamentally, is a more ideal procedure for password management and communication between two separate systems over a remote network. And so, what I mean by a remote network is one where your computer is somewhere else, right? And you want to access it, but you're like across the globe. I'm going to want to use keys instead of just using passwords, just because passwords are less secure. Um, a way to think about it is like there's a wire between two systems, and if if you try and communicate information over the wire and you literally communicate the information as is, it's easier for malicious hackers or what we call black hats to be able to obtain or capture that information over the wire. Whereas if we use the other method of keys, these SSH keys, there's algorithms in place and there's kind of a computational problem per se that is communicated from one system to the other. And the other system can only check if it's valid if it has the correct associated key. And so with that being said, it's like, hey, I have a math problem essentially with these variables, and only this variable will actually solve the problem. Can you prove that you have the variable that solves this problem? And so it sends it over and it either verifies or it doesn't verify that it can solve the problem, and then it grants access. That process is way more secure than just saying, hey, I have a password, it's secret, and then you type in secret and then it works. That's easy for people to maybe guess a bunch of random attempts at your password for one. And then for two, there's also that problem where if you're not careful, you could be maybe sending that password unencrypted across the wire, which is very important in and of itself. That's like a hashing algorithm where information gets hashed to a specific value and then sent across, then the dehash, this kind of whole computational, another set of security implementations. But that's important for us because if we wanted to hook up something like our iPhone or a MacBook to a server or a server to a MacBook or whatever it be, you know, you kind of have to understand this process and how to set it up. And so there's just different maybe ways to go about it and to think about it and working with that stuff adequately and really taking the time to outline that stuff is what is the most beneficial. Understanding there's permissions for files, understanding that there's ways to see permissions for those files, creating the specific files. There's a flag called -p that stands for parents. And so what that does is it can create every parent directory that is normally typically needed leading up to a specific file. And so here's something else I'm going to throw out there. There's also this thing called the curl, which is this like squiggly line brace thing that sits on like the top left of your keyboard if you hit shift. And if you place that preceding a forward slash and then the name of that file, so .ssh, it will actually create all of the pre-existing directories that are needed to point to that directory. But using -p also lets us say, hey, create these directories on the way to this one. But if they don't, or if they already exist, don't tell me that they exist and give me an error. Just what we call fail silently so it doesn't interrupt the process. And so if those files or folders, excuse me, don't exist, those parent directories, it creates them along the way. If they already exist, it doesn't throw out any errors, and then it creates the proper directory with the naming convention that we used. Something else I should note out too is the pre-leading dot notation that is next to SSH. So I say dot SSH. That's because typically it's a hidden file or a hidden folder, a hidden directory. And so that's because that's one of those files, unless you're kind of working, excuse me, one of those folders. If you're working with it, you should kind of know what you're doing or at least have a general idea. And so I think they kind of make these hidden files for that purpose, as well as security reasons, I suppose. There is a whole environments variable spiel that I went in on a couple episodes ago associated with web deployment. And different states carry these environment variables and they're loaded in at runtime. So if you're on something like a platform as a service server, you actually configure those. But in the case of if you use to run it off of your own machine, um, you set those environment variables locally, but then you make sure they're not tracked by a version control system, et cetera, et cetera. But the SSH process is very important. It's a very good skill. Some of that stuff is kind of abstracted away with something like a platform as a service. Actually, they make it really easy and kind of intuitive to log in. Usually you just kind of download that library or whatever it be via the command line interface, which is just a terminal, the cool hacker screen. And then you can log in with your associated credentials, and it makes it really easy because then it kind of integrates with your computer system very well, provided that you set everything up correctly, which is a big hinge point. But nonetheless, it kind of abstracts some of that away. Whereas in this case, about what we're talking about, I guess we're kind of getting into the weeds of what is SSH. It's a tool that lets us sign in remotely, and then there's like the port access, and then making sure that you have the firewall set up and understanding all that stuff, and IP address and all that stuff's important. It's unique to your device, unique to your setup, and so figuring that stuff out, even for, if you're using different devices or whatever it be, maybe atypical devices, you have to figure out how to make that work out, and how to set that up. It's very specific to your systems, very specific to kind of what your goal is, and so that's cool. We've also been retouching, actually not retouching, it's kind of new to us, working on flowcharts. That's abstractly new to us. So for anybody that doesn't know what a flowchart is, I'll give you guys the rough breakdown, since I'm already on this kind of computer tangent rambling rant. A flowchart is pretty much a means to logically think about a problem. So you have a problem and maybe you need to do what's called decomposition. And so what decomposition is, let's talk about that first. Decomposition is the process of where we take a problem and we break it down into subcategories, essentially, right? So let's say we have something like, I don't know, maybe you need to plan an event for something, right? There's going to be kind of like these big categories in that are associated with that problem, and then there's going to be more questions and categories derived, if not very direct questions related to those subcategories. So let's say you need to plan an event. Well, there's going to be the question of finances. There's going to be the question of setting the stuff up, when to have the event. How do you communicate? And then all of those have their own questions, right? So let's talk about finances. How are we going to get the money? Is it going to be volunteers? Is it going to be self-contributions? How much can we contribute? How much like materials, how much are the materials going to cost for the event, right? And then we could also talk about that next kind of step in the process, which is like, um, when are you going to have it? Is it going to be weather permitted? Is it going to be indoors? How much is the venue going to cost? Which is going to come back to that question before, like what venues are available? Do we need permits to host the event? Do we need to send out notifications specific to weather permitting days or not weather permitting days and that sort of thing? Which kind of ties into communicating, which is one of the other ones. Are we going to get volunteers? How do we know we're going to have people that sign up? How do we know if they want to sign up? How do we know if we're going to get a good turnout? Those are all sort of things that are related to decomposition, but these could be set up in a set of logical, processed thinking through a flowchart. And so the way that we do that is we set up and we think about what order that stuff will fall in. And so as we do that, you're assessing you send out a notification. So it's like a start button, right? You press start, the process starts, and you're like, we're going to send out notifications to see if anybody wants to help contribute to this event. Oh, okay. These people want to help contribute. Do they want to do X, Y, or Z? If they want to do X, then here's the things that they're going to do. Y, here's the things that they're going to do. Z, here's the things that they're going to do. What happens if we don't have enough volunteers or people that want to contribute? Well, then we need to have something set up for that. That's kind of like what we would call an edge case. But moving forward, assuming that you have enough people, uh, you know, depending on what the event is, right? What do we do? So once everybody figures out what they want to do, then we move on to weather permitting days. How do we know what days are weather permitting? So let's say it's sunny days, we're going to be outside. Okay, this day looks correctly. Notify everybody it's going to be on this day. And then we move into finances and materials. How much is it going to cost, since we know that we're probably going to do it on this day and we're probably going to need to pull what permits? What permits do we need to pull? What type of things are we doing? How are we doing them? And then we associate and communicate with the people that are contributing or maybe helping out. And so we gather numbers, we get that information, and then we move farther down that chain until we get to the point of where we set up the project. There's setup times, we start the project, and then we finish the project, and then we close up and wrap up, and everything looks great. That's kind of like the flow chart. And then within that flow chart are what we call decision trees. Decision trees are these things that are kind of based off of um, like a branch, right? So at the beginning, I said there was an X, Y, and Z. So if you have a group of people that are going to do something, let's say they're doing branch X. Branch X is going to have a bunch of questions associated, true, false, yes, no kind of logical thinking. And based off of that, we're then going to move into the process of finishing that branch out and then continuing with the overall process. And so there's not like a technical end. The technical end is like completion of the project and everything's wrapped up. And so you have like a start and an end, and then you have like a start and then like an end of a branch or continuing a process. And so that's kind of what your branches are. And so going over all of that thinking and stuff, it's kind of something I suppose I would say I kind of do intuitively, but this is the first time that I've really been pushing those boundaries of knowledge, really been pushing that kind of directional, logical thinking, putting it out, on a computer screen, maybe drawing it out, if need be, and working myself in that direction of thinking like that. Instead of just thinking, oh, hey, let me start building something. Oh, that would be a cool idea. I would write stuff down, but I wouldn't necessarily know how to write it down in the same kind of process. And that kind of brings me into little old Frankie over here. I'm sure you guys have maybe caught him, maybe not caught him in some previous episodes. The rubber duck method. The rubber duck method is an exceptional means and way to kind of show the gaps in your knowledge, kind of like show you what you don't know. Uh, maybe clue you into some things that you didn't realize you weren't thinking about correctly, or maybe give you more insight to maybe unforeseeable issues. This is helpful in programming because you can get stuck on a problem, and it can be really easy to get, I think, trapped in this moment where you're freaking out because it feels like there's so many different variables at play. But in reality, if you really just evaluate the problem and you talk the problem out loud to Frankie, Frankie's going to give you answers, even though Frankie isn't actually going to talk. All right. He's going to give you answers because as you start to break down the problem, you realize it's just a set of logical thinking principles and states. And you can look at those states and you can kind of look at those principles, and then you can derive answers as to why you're getting the error. And then you can change one little fractional moment or state and see if it fixes your problem. If it doesn't, then you repeat the process. And that can take time. It's going to take time. It's not something that just happens expediently. But I suppose that's maybe one of the more fundamental, maybe pillars of life, right? Pursuing what is meaningful over expediency can provide probably dividends in the long run, right? Like as far as knowledge and well-being is, if we often put off the things that we want right now, maybe we will get what we want later. And that sucks to say. And people don't like that. I don't like that, but the rubber duck method is kind of the same. You don't just change 6 things at once and hope that everything just magically works out because you changed those 6 things. You commit to the process, and then you make small micro adjustments along the way to get yourself in that direction. But that's why if what you're going for, if that thing that you're trying to obtain, you don't keep your eyes fixated on that thing, then it's going to be really, really, really difficult to nail down the process, to understand the process, right? And I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. If one moment I want to do nothing but do that thing, and then I'm having problems getting there, and maybe I am making the micro changes, right? And maybe I am eventually going to get there. But then I decide, well, now I want to do B. Well, I guess when you decide to do B, I guess you have to know that you're deciding to do B. That whatever that is. And in either of those processes in that decision, I suppose allotting yourself enough time to know whether or not the thing that you're trying to do is going to work out can only be figured out if you actually get to the goal. But if in the process of getting to that goal or that thing, you made like 8 rapid changes all at once and you didn't check to see if this one little change would actually make the difference, well, you won't know. And so I guess having like a good, having your eyes fixated on something that is both conscious in moments of doubt or moments of tremendous hardships, if you can consciously tell yourself that you're going to get there and that's why you're doing it, or B, you subconsciously are telling yourself that you're going to get there because you know what the goal is, right? Um, that's going to get you there. You know what I mean? And so, with that being said, I think that's a very important role. And the rubber ducking method, or the rubber duck method, or rubber duck debugging, that is a very good tool. And I knew that that was a thing, but I guess I really thought about it more this week. I really took the time to think about it more, and I think it's so true. And I think even with the tools and the stuff that I'm kind of uh, immersing myself in, or with, or mingling with, or playing and just kind of meddling. I don't know words. That process applies there too. Asking good, thoughtful, curated questions, not vague, open ended, no point of direction to base an answer. So, that could be used in a lot of different ways. And I think it's exceptionally important. And I think just going through that Frankie process, that's what I'm going to call it, the FP, the Frankie process. Going through that process is extremely beneficial. I think it's almost akin to like teaching somebody something. When you're trying to learn something new yourself, if you're teaching somebody how to do something, you'll collect the flaws, you'll realize what you could have done better, etc., etc., etc. It kind of applies the same. So that I think is extremely important, and I think that was something useful that I did this week. Moving along, um, I've been going over, since I was touching on the computer stuff a good bit, and that's actually what we were just kind of talking about. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing is in relation to the command line again, or the terminal, the terminal. Uh, and so I've been going back over commands and stuff and kind of understanding that, and I think it's super beneficial. I think it's super helpful for me progressing farther into that kind of journey. But I just got to keep my eyes on the goal. I guess uh, the same goal. Don't change the goal. Go for the goal. Set yourself up for success, and success will happen. Strive for success, and success will happen. Believe in success, and success will happen. Those are all things that in the hardest moments, you got to tell yourself. In the hardest moments, you still got to believe in what you're doing. And I have a hard time reminding myself of that sometimes. But I think if you do, it makes everything way, way more easier to tolerate, easier to think about, easier to navigate, easy to cope with, easy to believe in, easy to do it. And being naive to problems. That decomposition step is important because as you're analyzing problems, it's really easy to look at one big problem and go, oof, and then you get nothing done because you procrastinate because of how grand or how large that problem seems. When in all reality, it's just a bunch of small steps. It's just a lot of different small states. And if you analyze those small states and you collectively, um, you know, naively approach those, it's easier to get that big, large task done. And I think that's very helpful for me. There's a lot of stuff I feel like I've been doing as far as maybe dining out or like not following the diet where I was like kind of like falling off. And then I have like these moments of epiphany and I'm like, oh, you should have ate that. You shouldn't have done that. And then I wonder why my mental orientation, either towards what I'm doing or what I'm thinking or where I'm going, starts to fault. It's because those actions don't directly for me contribute to the process that I want to achieve, the thing that I want to achieve. And so really being disciplined and oriented in that way to capture that thing, I think is what is trivial. And I think that's a thing that everybody's gotta figure out. And I think that's what I'm trying to figure out. And I think using using that stuff I've been talking about in this podcast to achieve that is gonna be the way to do it. But that's just for me. It could be different for you guys. And but if you don't try and troubleshoot what you got going on and try and think about, what is it that I'm doing that I should figure out better, or what is it that, I could be doing better, or like why is it that I do that? But don't go too far, right? Make the micro adjustments, see if it makes the correct changes and orientation, move forward. One step at a time, one thing at a time. It's going to prove to be, I think, beneficial for a lot of people. It's beneficial for me for sure. But don't forget to reflect on the process, right? You just keep making changes and you're not looking into it. Well, then what did you expect was going to happen? But yeah, that's all I got for this one. I feel like this one was maybe a little more curated in the sense of the thought pattern. It kind of went everywhere, but it all kind of made sense and it kind of flowed together. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. This is Rolling with Reason. I'm Will. Thank you guys for tuning in, for listening. If you guys have been listening, leave some comments, answer some surveys, tell me what you think. Tell me this is horrible. Tell me it's great. Tell me you've been listening. Tell me you haven't. XYZ, all the above. If not, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Rolling with Reason. Episode number 37. Can't believe we've made it that far. Can't wait to get to a year. Thank you guys so much for listening if you did. I enjoy this and I'm not sure why. Still don't know what I'm doing. I don't think we ever do. Bye, everybody. Peace.
Thanks for listening. Stay resilient, embrace the struggle, and keep moving forward.